Welcome to The Explainer, where we break down big topics into clear, understandable guides.
You know, every single company out there, whether it's a tiny startup or a global giant, it all starts as just a simple thought, an idea, right, for a new product, a better service, or maybe just a completely different way of doing things.
So that's the big question, isn't it? How does a simple idea become, well, a person, a legal person? That's what we're going to get into. We'll walk through the entire life cycle of a company under Hong Kong law, from its birth through its life, and, what happens when things go wrong?
All right, let's dive right in at the very beginning. Our story actually starts before the company's even a thing, legally speaking. It starts with the people who are trying to bring it to life. We call them the promoters. So these promoters, they're the architects, right? They're doing all the early legwork, finding investors, getting everything ready. But here's the kicker, and this is really important. The law says they owe a duty of trust, what we call a fiduciary duty, to a company that doesn't even exist yet. And that means they are personally on the hook for any contracts they sign before the company is officially born. And this is all because you can't have a contract with someone who doesn't exist. It's just common sense, right? This brings us to a really key concept called pre-incorporation contracts. Think about it. A company isn't legally a person until it's incorporated. So if a promoter goes and signs a lease for an office or orders a bunch of equipment before that happens, who's responsible? They are, personally. The contract is with them, not the company that's still just an idea. So this brings you to a huge decision right at the start. What kind of business are you going to set up? On one hand, you've got the unincorporated route, like a sole proprietorship. Super simple, but you are the business. If it goes into debt, your house, your car, everything is on the line. But then there's the other path, incorporating. That's where you create a company that is its own separate legal person, and that's the one we're going to follow.
Okay, so once you've incorporated, the company gets its own DNA. It's basically an internal rulebook, and it's called the Articles of Association. Think of this as the constitution for the company. It's a legally binding contract that lays out how everything is going to be run on the inside, how directors get appointed, how meetings happen, what rights the owners have. It is the absolute foundation for the company's entire existence.
All right, so we've got this rule book, this DNA, and that leads us to what is, honestly, the single most powerful and, I think, most fascinating idea in all of company law. The moment a company is incorporated, it's legally born. It becomes its own person, totally separate from the people who started it. I mean, it can own a building, it can sign a contract, it can sue someone, and be sued, all in its own name. And let me be clear, this isn't just a metaphor. It is a straight-up legal reality. And because the company is its own person, this creates something amazing, a legal shield. This shield is the whole point of limited liability. The company's debts, they belong to the company, not you. It protects your personal stuff, your house, your savings from the company's creditors. If the whole thing goes under, you only lose what you put in. That's it. But what if that shield could be broken? Because as powerful as it is, it's not invincible. It's a privilege, not an absolute right. And in some pretty extreme situations, the courts can just decide to ignore it completely. Yeah, this has a great name. It's called piercing the corporate veil. It doesn't happen often, but it's a big deal when it does. Usually, it's when someone is using the company as a kind of puppet or a sham, just to get out of a legal obligation they already have. When that happens, boom, the shield shatters and the owners can find themselves personally on the hook for everything. Okay, so let's move on. We've established that a company is a legal person, but obviously it can't think for itself. It doesn't have a brain, so who's in charge? Who's making the decisions, and who actually owns this thing? Well, there are two key groups of people here. First, you've got the directors. They're the brain. Their job is to manage the company's business day to day. Then you have the members, who you probably know as shareholders. They're the owners. They're the ones who put up the money. And they have completely different powers and totally different jobs. And because the directors have so much power, they're literally running the show, the law puts a really heavy weight on their shoulders. They must act in the best interests of the company as a whole, not for their own personal gain. That's that fiduciary duty again. It's the key protection that makes sure the brain is always working for the good of the entire corporate body. So what about the owners, the members? How do they make their big decisions? Well, they're not in the weeds of daily management, but they do hold the ultimate power. And they exercise that power by voting on big decisions at meetings. And when it comes to voting, there are basically two magic numbers you need to know. The first one is more than 50%. For most of the routine stuff, like approving the yearly financial statements or maybe appointing an auditor, a simple majority is all you need. This is called an ordinary resolution. But for the really big stuff, the things that change the company's fundamental DNA, the bar is way higher. You need at least a 75% majority. This is called a special resolution, and it's for huge decisions, like changing the company's name or, you guessed it, changing its own rulebook, the articles. All right, so let's get real. Whenever you have power and money involved, you're gonna have conflict. It's just inevitable. So what happens when things go wrong? When people in charge start to disagree, or when the owners feel like they're being pushed aside?
Well, there's a legal tool for that. If a member feels the company is being run in a way that's unfairly prejudicial, that's the legal term, they can go to court. And we're not just talking about disagreeing with a bad business call. We're talking about real unfairness. Like maybe you're in a small company with your friends and they suddenly lock you out of all decisions. Or the directors are paying themselves huge bonuses while the company never pays out dividends to you, the owner. In those cases, the court has a ton of power to step in and fix it.
But what if a director does something that hurts the company itself, not just you personally? This is where something called a derivative claim comes in. It's a bit of a legal maneuver, but basically a member can ask the court for permission to sue a bad director in the company's name. They're stepping into the company's shoes to right a wrong. And here's the key. If they win, the money goes right back into the company's bank account because the company was the one that got hurt. And then, of course, there's the ultimate end of the story. If the fights just get too toxic to fix, or if the company is flat broke and can't pay its bills, it can be wound up. That's the legal term for liquidation. It's the end of the line. The company's life is over, its assets are all sold off, and the money gets paid out to whoever it owes, following a very strict pecking order. So, let's recap the whole journey, right? It starts with an idea. Promoters give it birth, creating a new legal person with its own DNA. It gets a life of its own, with a protective shield separating it from its owners. It's run by directors, owned by members, and has clear rules for making decisions. And when there's conflict, the law steps in. That, in a nutshell, is the life cycle of a company.
And that's our explainer. You can see how the law creates this incredible tool, the company, that lets people take risks and build economies, but it also has ways to hold them accountable, which leaves us with a really big question to think about. That powerful shield, the one that limits liability, it's a privilege the law gives us, not a God-given right. So where do we as a society draw the line?